Every journey begins with an idea, one that you can almost hold in your hands. You pick your stack and you start coding. You npm install a few things, you're feeling great, your vision is still in sight. Then you start copying some code from blogs. Things start getting intense, specific. You're still chugging along, but you have 3 different versions of Angular installed in your project, and you don't even know it. Next thing you know, you're dealing with the bugs and quirks of dozens of tools and libraries. This is not what you signed up for. Your vision is blocked by these sandbags of complexity. After you're faced with this, you're just simply devastated, imagining how things could have turned out for you. So congratulations, you've been trolled by JavaScript. You don't need dozens of libraries and tools to be successful. And I'm going to teach you how you can stop feeding this troll. I'd like to tell you a quick story about a monk who goes to the city. He's mesmerized by the richness and the diversity of the market. He'd like to buy a few things, but he doesn't have any money. He goes to a merchant, and the merchant asks him, "What can you give? How can you give without any possessions?" Well, the monk responds, "I can think, I can wait, and I can fast." So in the end, he gets all that he wants, and you can do so as well. Let's apply the same idea to JavaScript. Think. Don't rush the coding. Apply the 80-20 rule. Can you get to 80% with only 20% of the effort, using the libraries that you're already good at? Resist the urge to invent something new. Stick to simple defaults. Stick to best practices. Descope. Read the documentation, and then go back and reread the documentation. Only then go out there and check npm to see if there's some new library. Wait. At the edges of betas and release candidates, you burn. I've published a series of blogs on building beautiful and scalable Angular JavaScript apps. You can leverage your existing skills while getting good at new Angular concepts. Balance your productivity with experimentation. Remember that 80-20 rule. Fast. End the gluttony of JavaScript dependencies. Only by reducing your surface area of exposure can you become a master of what you work with. You'll be more productive, more effective, and you may actually begin enjoying your work. You can implement this philosophy using 3 core enablers, and these are Angular, npm, and TypeScript. Angular extends HTML rather than replacing well-known elements and APIs. It is modular, which means you won't have to remodel your entire kitchen when all you have is a leaky faucet. This decoupling makes it easier to follow best practices like Solid. Thanks to more explicit configuration and error messaging, you're the one in control when it comes to Angular. So become an Angular expert. npm is the world's largest ecosystem of open source libraries. It ships with Node. It is simply everywhere. It's really powerful. It can simplify your configuration significantly. Use the shrink wrap feature in npm and shrink wrap your packages. Become an npm expert. TypeScript is the past, present, and future of JavaScript. You can write async await code with no callbacks and run it on IE6. With simpler code, type checks, and interfaces, code becomes more scalable. This is important because you can do full stack using TypeScript with Angular and Node. I've published the minimal mean project that demonstrates this very concept. In fact, later on we're going to be digging into this minimal mean project. So become a TypeScript expert. TypeScript fixes this really important problem in JavaScript, which is called the JavaScript feature gap. So when we deploy a JavaScript application, we're kind of torn. We want to be most compatible with the users out there, people who even run IE6. But as developers, we also want to have access to rich features that simplify our code base and make our lives easier. So that means if we're working with some ancient version of JavaScript, we're going to be least productive, but most compatible. But if we're using TC39 proposals, which is the body that approves new JavaScript or standards, we'll be most productive, but our code is going to only run on a few percent of the machine. So TypeScript closes this feature gap. In 2015, ES3, which is what IE6 supports, was the past of JavaScript. And the present was ES5. And the future was ES6. And since then, they renamed how ECMAScript, or otherwise known as JavaScript, is versioned. It's now called ES 2015. So everybody thought, once all the browsers implement ES6, we're not going to need these transpilers anymore, like Babel, Tracer, or TypeScript. But what happened was the next year, ES6 moved into the mainstream, and then there was a new version, ES 2016, coming down the horizon. But the reality was, a lot of people were still using ES5 on their browsers, and ES6. So it was like a 50-50 divide. So and then this year, ES5 is now comfortably moving into the past, and ES6 has a lot more mainstream support. But now some browsers have ES 2016 support, some browsers don't. And ES 2017 is on the horizon, and it supports async await, which is a kind of a life-changing feature for developers. So what's happening here is there's this feature gap that is continually shifting. And with the ECMA standard body's commitment to releasing new JavaScript version every year going forward, this is going to continue happening. Enter TypeScript. TypeScript can take your ES 2017, ES 2016, or ES 2015 code, and it can transpile it down to, and when I say transpile, that means it takes your TypeScript code and it converts it down to even ES3. So you can write this really advanced async await code, and it will run even on IE6. All right, so with Angular, NPM, and TypeScript, you can pretty much accomplish any task and do so effectively. You don't want to be overwhelmed by the diversity and the richness of the wonderful JavaScript ecosystem. You want to be like her, more worried about drinking your tea than fending off her foes, I guess, otherwise known as product managers. All right, so think, wait, and fast. So now let's dig a little bit deeper. So what's in a stack? When we talk about full stack JavaScript or full stack TypeScript, what are we talking about? We care about ease of use. You can combine any technology you want. You can combine Fortran with .NET and React.js. Is it gonna be easy to do so? No, you'll hate your life. Another thing, happiness. These things should come together in a way that makes you happy. I mean, if you have to deal with 5 different tools just to make a simple edit to your code base and publish it, then you're going to be pretty miserable. You're not going to be happy. So not only these things should come together, but they should also work together well, and the tooling around it should be good. And they should also be effective. I personally despise the load times you get with Visual Studio. I quit Visual Studio just because of that, and mostly .NET, because every time I double click it and a minute and a half passes by, I'm already on Facebook, and then 10 minutes later I forgot what I was working on. So we want to be like this guy, like never hitting the pipes, right? It's very relaxing to watch. Right, so picking the right stack is key. You also don't want it to be overwhelming. You don't want to put in 20 things together clumsily and barely holding together, because when you onboard someone new to your team, then it's going to take them 6 months to become effective. You want people to become effective within their first week, really, and become active contributors to your code base that quickly. Just because you pick few things doesn't mean that's going to work out, right? We want your stack to look like this, with the right amount of sauce and butter on it, or syrup rather. Okay, so any stack, and this is about how we kind of put our code together, includes a presentation layer, an API layer, a business layer, a persistence layer, and then you have your IDE, best practices, patterns, libraries, and of course, I'm sure all of you are primarily concerned with testing, right? Test automation. How many people here do test automation? All right, about a fifth of the room. All right, it's really important. Do it. Okay, so you don't want to feel like this. And you don't want your developers to feel like this. You don't want your new team members to feel like this. You want everyone to feel like this, right? You want to achieve full stack Nirvana. Okay, so is everyone familiar with the mean stack? What that means? Okay, just one person raised their hand. So that's Mongo. Does anyone know what Mongo is? Okay. MongoDB is a document-based database. It stores your data in unstructured documents like JSON files, and over time it has become quite advanced. You can write join type queries with it, and the benefit of it is if you're writing an application where all you're doing is basically storing and retrieving data and displaying on some front end or some mobile app, and you're converting everything to JSON to begin with, if your entire pipeline is in JSON, you don't have to worry about all those serializations and deserializations that kill your performance, and things just kind of flow through. Another advantage is you don't have to sit down and spend months trying to put a really complicated relational model together. You can just start coding, and as your requirements change on you, which I guarantee you will happen after your first demo, because I'm sure you guys after your first demo you probably had to redesign half of your data model, which is not fun. So why go through the trouble unless you have some stringent requirements and need to have a relational data model. And then the E in it is Express.js. That's just the web API framework for Node.js, and Node.js is server-side JavaScript. Basically, it's a server. And then the A stands for Angular. So that's a pretty popular stack if you want to do a full stack. But whenever you read about the mean stack, you'll see people pulling in all these other libraries in there. So that's why I named my approach to it minimal mean. So we're focusing on these core technologies. We're avoiding all the other stuff that comes with it. Okay, so the mean stack in our presentation layer would include Angular and Angular Material. Has anyone heard of, or how many people here work with Angular? Okay, so that's about 2/3 of the crowd. And how about Angular Material? Okay, that's just a few people. So Angular Material is actually what makes Angular awesome. It is a collection of rich user controls that has the behavior, the look and feel baked into the controls. So all you do is you just put it into your HTML, and basically you don't have to write CSS anymore. And by default, your UI is scalable. You can build desktop and then just shrink down the window, and it'll scale down nicely. You can take over and customize it as well, but it's really awesome to work with. And then on our API layer, we have Express.js that expose our RESTful endpoints. And who's familiar with RESTful endpoints here? Okay, that's a lot of people. So that's get, post, put, delete actions that we do. And it's an open web standard, so when we build our endpoints using REST, we're cross-compatible with pretty much every technology. So one recommendation I would make is even in your internal communications, services communicating with each other in your enterprise, just ostracize any kind of proprietary communication technologies like WCF and convert everything to REST. This will make you be able to innovate much faster, because if you have a client, a mobile client, a web application, so long as it's communicating to some RESTful server, it doesn't care if your server is in .NET or Java or Node. You can even have a combination of mixture of all those things. And similarly, we can't predict some new technology that's going to come out in 5 years, but it's pretty much guaranteed it's going to support REST. All right, so Node is our server. That's where we would implement our business logic, and then so this is where the minimalness of the minimal mean comes in. You want to use the native Mongo driver if you're working with mean. Do not use things like Mongoose or all these other wonderful frameworks that promise you the world, because they end up being buggy. All you have to do is look at Entity Framework, which has the full weight of Microsoft behind it, and it is. There's so many words I can fit in there. I'm not gonna vocalize those, but it is less than ideal. It is not perfect. It's flawed, and even if Microsoft can't get this right, surely some open source project isn't going to be able to get it right easily. So you want to stick to the source here, to the bare metal, and become a Mongo expert, not some other libraries expert. And then we have Visual Studio Code, Gulp, TypeScript, npm, GitHub, and continuous integration tools to contend with. And then we can do testing with Jasmine and Protractor. So Jasmine is a unit test framework for JavaScript, and Protractor works specifically with Angular to build UI tests. All right, so there's AngularJS. That's Angular 1.x is now called AngularJS, and everything else, Angular 2, Angular 4, they're called Angular. So that's a branding difference there. So someone says AngularJS, they mean the old one. Someone says Angular, they mean the new one. So Angular is a platform, and it's the glue that kind of ties together different iterations of Angular. You can build web applications with it. You can build progressive web applications with it. You can build hybrid mobile applications with it, or rather, you can build mobile web applications with it. But you can also build hybrid mobile applications that you can install into your phone. You can build desktop applications with it, and you can build server-side rendered views with it as well. So on top of Angular core, we have the web framework, Ionic, React Native, Electron, or rather native script is what I meant to say there. Electron and Universal. So Electron is the desktop framework, Universal is the server-side framework, Ionic is the mobile framework, and the web platform ships with Angular. So we we always pay attention to full stack architecture, but we rarely pay attention to front end architecture. So if you don't treat your front end with the same respect you treat your back end, you're not going to get good results out of that. So you want to make sure, no matter what technology you work with, is you have a proper architecture on your front end as well. So you want to have a view model, a controller router, services, and here it's really important. If you have a function in your JavaScript that reads something from the HTML, goes make a server call, and then has some if statements in there, and then goes ahead and writes something out, or navigates to a different page, or shows shows something else to the user, you're breaking the single responsibility principle in so many different ways in that one function. You want to make sure that all those separate parts, all the HTTP calls are in a separate file, so that when you're making that call from your view model, you're just saying get users. You're not saying http.get /users, because the thing is, you may change where those users come from in the future. It may not come from the same API endpoint, but also you may choose to implement an offline first capability. It may be coming from the local storage, and that way you wouldn't have to change any of your view model code. So you want those separations of concerns as much as possible, and especially business logic. Your business logic should always remain on the server. There should be a very minimal amount of business logic on your front end, but if you do so, make sure it's in a service, isolated in a manner that you can actually unit test. So once again, we have our IDEs, best practices, patterns, and libraries that are specific to front end that we need to contend with and testing. All right. So let's look at the anatomy of an Angular application. An Angular application has a router, and then it can have routes that are tied to that router, and then you can have services, filters, and directives attached to that, where we're injecting. And then we can have multiple routes, we can have child routes, but one important feature of Angular is this concept of tree shaking. So you could have a massive application with thousands of views. If you architect your Angular application correctly, using child routes, for example, if we define a route like /c or /a or /master/detail, what's going to happen is when Angular compiles your application, it's going to pull everything together and it's going to package it. You're going to have a, let's say, 3 megabyte file. But if you have thousands and thousands of views, your file is going to be huge. Let's say 20 megabytes. But the reality might be some users are only going to use a particular module of your application and never the others. So if we use these child routes, what it's going to do is when it's packaging the application, it will only package the bits that are necessary to display these routes, like the /a and /c, and all the services, filters, directives that are being used by those. And it's going to look at this B, and it's going to actually package that into a different file. And what's going to happen is it's only going to pull that down from the server if the user goes to that route. So this B can have its own child router with its own routes, and even its own services, filters, and directives. Another benefit of this is you can have teams of people working on the same Angular application, and they're not going to clash with each other. They're not going to have conflicts with each other because they can all separate out their services, filters, and directives. All right, so this is a look at Angular material. It offers you rich user controls that you can just plop into your Angular application. It contains high quality components, uses CSS Flexbox. So if any of you work with Bootstrap, the main difference here is Bootstrap has this idea of 12 columns. which makes me sometimes want to hurt myself when I want to do 33% to 66%. So CSS Flexbox is actually based on a percentage system, so a lot more reasonable. In the future, they're going to be releasing features where it can look at, because it uses TypeScript, you can write an interface. It's kind of like a C# interface, and it can infer what you're trying to get from that, and it can dynamically generate input forms for you. But that's coming down. And the best thing about Material is it really minimizes the amount of CSS you need to write by a huge margin. So just by that fact, it's a huge productivity booster for developers. So Express is unopinionated, fast, and very minimalist. It's very easy to learn. Node is super lightweight. If you're handling any kind of load of users hitting your website, just switch to Node. You won't even see your CPU go above like 10%. Walmart actually rolled out Node during Black Friday a couple years ago, and they served 1.5 billion requests that morning, and their CPU never went above 10%. And they even felt so confident that they pushed an update during Black Friday. So good luck convincing your boss doing that. All right, so Mongo is the documented-oriented database with dynamic JSON-like schemas. And then the native Mongo driver is the official API that the makers of MongoDB release. Webpack is what Angular uses to package your application into those separate files by analyzing your code base. It's pretty neat. All right, so that's kind of all the stuff that goes into a full stack TypeScript solution. So, but if you go ahead and build something, if you don't ship it, it never happened, right? Shipping is scary. And hard and difficult, but it works. So you gotta put stuff out there, right? You gotta iterate. You gotta push your. So when you do your first demo, it's guaranteed your requirements are going to change, right? So get to that first demo in 2 weeks. If you say that's crazy, then 4 weeks. But get to that first demo as quickly as possible, so that you can remain nimble and respond to your users' needs. So to make that happen, you need continuous integration setup. So for this, you can use CodeShip. It's a really easy to pick up continuous integration solution. You select your GitHub private repository or Bitbucket. They now support GitLab as well, private or public repository. And really it needs 3 lines of code to set it up. You just do npm install, and then if you're using gulp, or you can do npm start or whatever, and you can do npm test or gulp test, just some command line that you would otherwise run on your computer. You just type it in here and it just runs it on the cloud. And then it'll give you nice, success failure messages with every code push that you make. And then the nice thing about CodeShip is then at the tail end of this process, you can tie it to push it to another service, like Heroku or Google App Engine, or Amazon Elastic Beanstalk. So it really makes setting up this continuous integration and continuous delivery stuff easy. And it's actually free for 100 builds a month. So you can start using it today. And continuous delivery is really important. You want to at least always have some kind of a development box set up in your organization where every code push is deployed live. So someone wants to go in there and inspect what you've been working on, they can go ahead and do that, or your testers go ahead and look at it. From there, of course, you can do gated releases to test environments, mock environments, staging environments, and then production environments. But you always want to have some kind of a server that has the absolute cutting edge latest. So for this, if you're working with web technologies, Heroku is really awesome. In fact, let me show you how awesome it can be. So here is some of our kind of experimental applications that we have at Excella. And I can select an app. And what this feature it has is called pipelines. I can have my staging app and my production app separately. And what happens is, for example, I can tie my CodeShip build to continuously deploy to this staging environment so that people can test it. And then when I'm ready and I'm happy about it, all I need to do is just click this one button, promote to production, and within seconds, it's immediately going to go to production. And a really cool feature is, does anyone work with pull requests here? Okay, some nods. When you create a pull request, that's going to show up in here, and it's going to allow you to provision a server, a new server, on the fly. And then you can point your testers to, hey, go and check out this pull request, to see if it's buggy, if it's breaking anything, before merging your code into your master branch. So it's really powerful. It gives you these really sophisticated functionality that you would need teams and teams of DevOps people in-house to get for free, really. You only pay for it if you upgrade to production instances. And some new features, like it can run your tests for you, but CodeShip does that as well. And you can set up your environment variables up here, so your secrets are secure. So I highly recommend checking out Heroku. It's a really awesome tool. Okay, so this, compared to AWS, right? When you look at the AWS dashboard, it's a little bit intense. It makes you a little bit, So we want to remain in this zone. So whenever you see a tool and you see it's like so complicated, don't just assume that complexity is needed. There are simpler and equally capable solutions out there. All right, so another thing we touch on is collaboration. You have to behave differently if you want to achieve all these things. Your process cannot look like this, right? Everything all over the place. So if you do spaghetti teamwork, what's going to happen is you're going to get a gross exception thrown there. Things aren't going to work out. You want more like this. Maybe not that intimate, but it's more graceful. Right. So collaboration is not just about code. You have issues, you have bugs, you have new features, discussions happening, code reviews, status updates. For this, GitHub is amazing. It can do all of these things for you. It can house your wiki, it can house your issues, it can house your discussions. So everything remains contextually tied and connected together and in one place. If you don't want to use github.com, you can buy GitHub Enterprise and host it in-house. I don't recommend this because why would you do that when you can just pay a few bucks a month for a private GitHub repository and let GitHub handle all the infrastructure stuff? But yeah, you can label things, you can assign things, you can create milestones. It's highly capable. So if you haven't given GitHub a look, please give it another look. And if you're doing Agile Scrum, you can use waffle.io and connect your GitHub repository to it and get a kind of a Scrum view. And you can have your kind of live Scrum board. So this really integrates, developer actions with, program manager type actions, and merges everything together, and everything is real time and up to date. So if you think Git is kind of difficult to work with, or it's convoluted, there's actually the GitHub for Desktop app, which really makes it easy to clone repositories, create branches, commit changes, and submit pull requests. And really someone with very little understanding of how Git actually works, can work with this application very easily. So remember, we're all about getting your new team members productive within the first week. They should be able to commit their first code and be productive, and not break builds and ruin everyone's lives inside that first week. So for more details, you can go to blog.excel.com. I have a detailed blog post about using GitHub, and I'm going to post this on my website later. So let's get into some code. So we want to look at Angular setup, server setup, Docker setup, database connectivity, document TS, and use of async await. So let's do this. Can everyone see this? All right. So this is Visual Studio Code. Have you worked with Visual Studio Code at all? Okay, so about a third of the room did. So it's really great because it's really fast. It opens within seconds, and it's also very capable. You can do .NET Core, C# coding with it, Python, React.js, AngularJS, whichever one you want. It's highly extensible as well. And one of the best features of it is it has this built-in terminal here, so I don't have to keep switching back and forth between my command line and my terminal. It also has this built-in kind of markdown render, which I like. So let's look at the anatomy of how our code is put together. So we have a server folder here and a web app folder. So our server code, our backend code is in that folder, and our front-end code is in this web app folder. And at the high level, we have a package.json file that kind of just defines what our project is. And what it does is it gives us a, I've stolen this pre-install script from somewhere, I forget. But what it does is it goes ahead and traverses all your folders and calls the npm install commands on all your folders. So it's really convenient when you just clone this repository and you type in npm install at the root level. It actually installs all of your dependencies for you. And then another thing that it does is it contains our Docker compose file. Who knows what Docker is? Okay, so Docker is a containerization platform. It's different than virtualization. With virtualization, you have the full OS to contend with. The full OS and all the bits that are in the operating system that communicates with the hardware. But with containerization, parts of the operating system that communicate with the hardware is actually abstracted away. So if a virtual machine is gigabytes in size, a Docker image is megabytes in size. So that's the big benefit here. So if we look at this Docker compose file, we'll see it's grabbing our web app, and then it's building it, and then it's assigning a port number to it, and then it's grabbing our server app, it's building it, it's setting an environment variable in it, and hooking it up so that it can connect to the correct database. And then it's setting up a dependency to the database. And then our database command pulls down the MongoDB image from Docker that Mongo has released, and it sets the ports for it. So using just one command, Docker compose up, anyone who just clones this can have a full stack application running in their own computers within seconds. All right, so here we're seeing that our server works. And then if we go to 8080, we'll see that our front-end app works. So let's look at how that works. So I mentioned here, this goes ahead and pulls our web app. What that means is it actually looks for the Docker file in the folder web app. So this is super simple. I actually built this minimal node web server image that you can all pull from Docker. It's public. And all you need to do is you just need to change the working directory within this image to user source app, and then copy your output folder, which in this case is dist, which is not displayed here because I'm hiding it from view so people don't mistakenly go ahead and edit it. And it copies the contents of that into a folder named public. And then this server that I built, it serves whatever is in that public folder. So even if you just want to push out a website with just a few HTML files, you can still use this, and all you need to do is just copy the contents in there and it'll just work. And the best thing about this is the size of this image, even including my Angular code, is 30 megabytes. So my entire payload that I'm deploying on the server is 30 megabytes. This brings down my hosting requirements from gigabytes and gigabytes down to, I'm actually running this, running some websites on DigitalOcean, where like the RAM of my server is 512 megabytes, and I have 4 different websites running on it. And they're all individually containerized, so they're actually all using like different versions of Node and different technologies. And the nice thing is, on the host OS has none of those things installed in it. Like Node is not installed on it, or any other framework or library. So it really helps you to manage things neatly. It also, as a developer, I can configure something, and when I ship it out, I know that someone else in the process didn't mess with that. Having said that, Docker is awesome because it works in layers. So if your ops people or security people want to pull your development image and they want to add their own configuration stuff on top of it, they're free to do so. Okay, so this web app was actually generated using the Angular CLI. So this makes it really easy to get started with Angular. If you go to cli.angular.io, all you need to do is run ng-new-app. So let's just do that. So ng-new code stock demo. What it's going to do is it's going to automatically scaffold an Angular application for me. And it will do so in a manner where it's hooked up with unit testing, where it's hooked up with Webpack, and the correct routing and the starting components in place. So it really makes it easy to get into Angular. And one of the things it comes with is also a linting mechanism. So linting is basically a style check, code analysis, and it really keeps all the team members in check. When they do something they're not supposed to do, it tells them, you need to you need a bracket there, or you need a space there, or you can't just put underscores at the beginning of your variables, or things like that. So we looked at that anatomy of an Angular app, and here, so this main TS is the first file that kind of gets executed in Angular, which calls this bootstrap module app module, and then the app component or app module then gets loaded, which is here where you can see that core platform being pulled in, and then on top of that we're adding the browser platform. So if we were building some Angular views on the server side, we'd be bringing in platform-server, for example. If you want input forms, you can bring in the forms module. If you want to be able to make HTTP calls, you can bring in the HTTP module. So this is a huge difference compared to AngularJS, where all these things they come together with the framework and you can't separate them out. So even if you're just building a single page with Angular, you have to ship megabytes and megabytes of code down to your client just to display that one page. Whereas with Angular, I can take these out and my payload is going to be a lot smaller. And then we are requiring our first component, our app component. And then it has this kind of explicit declarations that you need to do. And really the purpose of this is to make developers think twice about what they're trying to include into their application. So here you declare your components, your modules, and your services go under the providers. And then we're also telling Angular, hey, bootstrap the application using this app component. So you can see there are lots of steps here that need to happen even just before we get to AppWorks. That's why they in part built the CLI. So here, this is our app component. We can pull in our HTML and CSS into it, or we can define it inline if we chose. We can just kind of put some HTML in here, and it would just work just fine. So if you have something really simple, you don't need to be spread across 3 files. You can bring everything together in one file. Okay, so that's basically how our Angular app works. And then we have our unit tests and all that great stuff. That's already set up for you. Another great thing about so our CLI just ended up getting done here, so we can just cd into that folder, and let me zoom in on this as well. So here, that same exact structure that I demoed to you, and then I can go to my terminal and just type in ng-serve. And it'll go ahead and start a server for me. So in the minimal mean, I customize it so it runs on my server. But out of the box, you can actually make it just run, or you can just run it with that one command. So let's see what port it's trying to use, so we can check out the correct thing. There you go. So localhost 4200. So if we click on that, hopefully that's going to launch a browser or not. There you go. So one of the great things about the Angular CLI though is that we can go ahead and generate new components. So if I say ng generate my new component, let's say, let's just say to-do list, ng generate component to-do list, it'll go ahead and actually do it for you. Put all the files in place so you don't have to do it. And it can generate services, directives. It can even hook up the routing for you. And the nice thing about the CLI is the Angular team is committed to keeping this up to date. And as Angular is upgraded going forward, it's even going to allow you to automatically upgrade your code so it remains compatible with the new versions of Angular. So if they, for example, if they choose to swap the variables on some new API, it's going to go analyze your code. Because it's TypeScript, they can do that, and it's going to swap the variables for you. So it's really makes it easy to stay up to date with Angular. And then let's look at our backend code here. So our backend code starts with index.ts. It pulls in this config file, and then this server file, and then document.ts. Document.ts is my project. It contains some, it's built on TypeScript, so it contains some convenience functions to be able to connect to MongoDB and use some Mongo functionality, but it doesn't get in between you and Mongo. It keeps Mongo available to you at all times. It just gives you some niceties. So one of those is this connect function, where you can just do, and this is async await in action using JavaScript. I can just say, async function start, await document.connect. I just pass in my URI that I defined in my Docker compose, and then I'll go ahead and connect to my database. And then here, I'm saying this server that I'm pulling in, this is my Express application. And then by calling server.instance.listen, I'm kicking off my web application. And here I'm just calling start, so it just calls this function and starts off the application. If we look at the server, this is just a classic Express setup. And the nice thing here is we get autocomplete with TypeScript. Just like we're used to with Java or C#, we get the full benefit of all these technologies. And then here, so we saw that server works message. That's just an implementation of a get API on the root of my server, and it just sends that response back. So here I can send back HTML if I want to, or I can send back JSON if I want to. And we're going to look into a more complicated example in a second. And this instance is just this http.create server using this configuration that I just made here. And that's a Node.js functionality, the HTTP library. So we're always sticking to the core technologies that we're working with here. And this config.ts is something that I do. It just reads my environment variables, provides some sensible defaults when I'm working in my local environment. And this is the Docker file for it. So here it's a little bit more complicated because this is actually, this is similar to how my minimal node web server is set up. It gets the Alpine Linux as its base, which is only 5 megabytes in size, and then does some security conscious activities here to limit user access, and then there's this trick here called dumb minute, because on Linux the first process that you start has always the same process ID, so that makes you vulnerable to hacks and attacks. So by as our first process, we're starting basically an executable that does nothing, and that always becomes 0, and then we kick off our node server, which then gets a randomized process ID. And if you go on Docker Hub, I'll share my website at the end. You can read more about the security best practices related to that. So that's our app coming together. This app doesn't do anything interesting, right? Other than to demonstrate that it just executes and runs. but it does demonstrate it is easy to put it together. It's not very complicated. You can wrap your head around it. And the most important part of it is this web application portion of it. This is not something I came up with, these folder structures and all these things. These are dictated by ng-cli. I created this using ng-cli. And that's really important because we want something that you create when you bring someone else onto your team for things to remain familiar with each other. All right. So as a tip, there's this super awesome website called runkit.com. This allows you to write code in the cloud, like with some npm dependency, for example. And we can just create an array and say we want to test out some Lodash functionality. Let's see if this works. It'll maybe work. Okay, there you go. So what we did here is we declared an array with the values 1, 2, 3, 4 in it. We passed that into the filter function, and then we wrote an inline function, which is the same thing as saying, doing this function. If I could type this morning. It's the same as doing this, and it basically returns all the values that are not 2. And here we can see our result. So Runkit is a huge time saver. You can also do the same thing in your local environment if you like. It's called Quokka. For your, you can install this for Visual Studio Code, and you can get live execution of JavaScript code right there in your Visual Studio Code. I can't tell you how awesome this is when you're hitting some API, and on the fly it just dynamically calls it, and you're seeing what you're getting, and you're just working with it in real time. Especially if you're unfamiliar with that API, it is amazing to work with it. Okay. So. I want to mention document TS a little bit. So document TS allows you to build your own models, but it offers you a kind of some opinions in terms of doing that. So this code is not yet part of minimal mean, but I wanted to show you some. So here I can declare an interface of what I expect my data model to continue, and this is where TypeScript types come into play. When I do a colon and then a type name, that's very TypeScript specific. That's not JavaScript, and it's also optional. You don't have to do it. So then I'm creating a class address which implements my interface. I have a constructor here with my required variables and default values. This is also a TypeScript thing, the ability to provide default values. And then I can create a function in my class and says validate address, and if it's not valid, I can throw an exception. So I can actually prevent my code from creating invalid addresses. And I can also have read-only getters, so getters and setters. I can make those happen in JavaScript now. Here is a get full address thing. So if I get a JSON of my address here, it's actually going to have, in addition to these properties, it's also going to have a property named full address, which is going to, format it nicely for me so I don't have to write that code on my front end. I can also create a dot to JSON. So that's one of the things that document TS does for you. If you implement a dot to JSON method, and you can choose then which getters you want to actually send down to the client. On server side, these will work, but if you actually want to send these down to the client, you have to implement this to JSON. And I can have my kind of business logic, even though these are simple, within that same file here. So what does document.ts do? It defines some interfaces like iDocument, iCollection provider, iPagination result, just to help make things easier for you. So this is a bit more complicated example here, where we have our address. We're importing our address, business, purchase, credit card. We can have password requirements and some functions. But really, this is the meat of what we're trying to do here. This is a user that we're creating, which extends iDocument. So that's a document.ts feature. And then user extends and implements, so extends document, right? And then we're using generics to pass in iUser. So this is once again, so actually document is a Mongo. No, that is, yeah, document is also a document.ts feature. So what does this buy me? Let's look at that. This buys me, so this is the implementation of an express endpoint. So we're saying get users, and then here, this allows me to create a user collection factory, right? So I can say, I can go ahead and take advantage of some really advanced Mongo functionality like aggregate queries. This is basically doing joins and geolocation or geo queries and all those things. And then in my code, in my API code, it looks super simple. I can just say user collection.find with pagination. This is something that's built into document.ts. So like you don't even have to write pagination code. It works automatically. Or if I want to execute that really complicated query, the aggregate query that I wrote, I can just call it with one function call. So really the idea is, using our models, keep our database code in our models, separate them from our business logic that we may have here, so these look actually simple to read. And with TypeScript, we're able to use async and await, so our error handling, our code flow and application flow is really easy to read and maintainable. So in summary, we talked about what's the stack, we talked about minimal mean, we talked about document.ts, and the importance of shipping code, collaboration with your teammates, and then we went ahead and looked at some code. So hopefully now you're all a little bit more familiar with how these technologies can be put together. So remember, you want to be like her, just calmly drinking your tea while the world around you is just in chaos. Because if you try to do too much, you risk becoming a master of none. So try to pick your battles as much as possible. All right, so there's some of this code is on github.com/excellalabs. And then there also, I have the JavaScript curriculum that'll take like absolute beginners. And I'm talking about people who don't even know how to Google things. And then it'll take them and make them a JavaScript expert. All right, so the slides and links are going to be up on the javascriptpromise.com. Most of this content is already up there, but these specific slides aren't up there yet. I'll put that up and tweet it later today. And follow me at Uluca. Thank you.